Imagine fighting, like, the hardest battle of your entire life. You literally go to war with your own biology, and against all odds, you win.
Yeah, which is incredible in itself.
Right, and suddenly everyone around you is just patting you on the back. They're calling you resilient. They're calling you an absolute inspiration. To the outside world, you are just this perfect picture of victory. But secretly, internally, you feel like you are standing dead center in the middle of a Category 5 hurricane.
Oh, it is a profound, terrifying disconnect. I mean, the people around you, they see the cessation of a bad habit and they basically throw a parade.
Yeah.
While your internal landscape is just being entirely ripped apart, you are surrounded by all this praise, yet you have honestly never felt more isolated in the storm.
Exactly. And that exact disconnect is the core focus of our deep dive today. So welcome to another episode of Vital Voyage Spotlight. I am your host, Mark Brown.
And I am Sarah McIntyre.
And today, we are pulling apart a set of incredibly raw excerpts from an essay. It's titled Beyond Abstinence, The Architecture of True Recovery.
Such a powerful title, honestly.
It really is. It was written by Michael Cline, who is actually featured as the April 2026 Author of the Month, published by Tom O'Connor. And our mission for this session, well, what we are really trying to do is completely dismantle the conventional wisdom about getting clean.
Right, because the conventional wisdom is so flawed.
It is. We are unpacking the hidden, heavily misunderstood architecture of what actually separates true foundational recovery from mere abstinence. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because Michael's essay, it starts with these numbers that most people in the recovery space would consider the absolute mountaintop.
Yeah, the Holy Grail.
Right. As of his writing, he is 26 years heroin-free and 15 years alcohol-free.
Which, I mean, those milestones usually trigger the end of the story in our cultural narrative.
Right.
Like the dragon has been slain, roll the credits, you are fixed.
Yep, you're cured.
Exactly. And Michael even admits he experienced this brief window following those milestones where he felt kind of invincible. The physical dependence was broken. And that initial rush of reclaiming control over his body felt genuinely triumphant.
But the triumph was entirely superficial, which is the crazy part. He describes himself during this prolonged period of sobriety not as a healed person, but he uses the term award-winning actor.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he was projecting this impenetrable outer shell of pride and strength, simply because that is the exact role society demanded he play.
They wanted a success story.
Exactly. People praised his resilience, so he gave them the resilient character they paid to see. But beneath that performance, he was masking this perfect storm of self-loathing, unresolved childhood trauma, and just a deeply embedded, unshakable belief that he was fundamentally inadequate.
And you know, as Mark just pointed out, the performative aspect of early sobriety is something we so rarely analyze. When an individual stops a highly visible destructive behavior, like intravenous drug use, the social reward system just kicks in immediately. Family is relieved, employers are satisfied, and the pressure to maintain that facade of being fixed becomes immense. But eliminating the substance only removes the coping mechanism. It doesn't touch the root.
Not at all.
Let's look at the underlying logic of Michael's situation. He was not using narcotics recreationally. He was using them as a crude form of anesthesia to just numb memories and emotions that were completely intolerable to his nervous system.
Yeah, I always think of it like a sinking boat. You are out on the ocean taking on water fast, so you just grab a bucket and start frantically bailing. And abstinence is basically just the act of bailing the water.
That's a great way to look at it.
You might get the deck dry for a minute, and your passengers might cheer because they don't see water around their ankles anymore, but you are completely ignoring the gaping hole in the hull. The ocean is still there. The structural breach is still there.
Right, and to take that analogy a step further, taking away the drug without treating the trauma is like taking away the bucket while the hole remains wide open.
Oh, man.
You strip away the anesthesia, but you don't magically erase the memories or the self-loathing. You leave the original intolerable feelings entirely raw, totally exposed, and actively flooding the system.
Which means the brain is inevitably going to demand a new bucket.
Exactly.
If stopping the substance doesn't fix the underlying pain, the mind just has to find another way to survive the distress.
Because the human nervous system simply cannot sustain a state of perpetual raw agony. It just can't. If the original pressure valve is sealed off, the steam will inevitably blow a hole somewhere else.
So let's track how that substitution actually played out in Michael's timeline. Back in August 1999, he officially kicked the monkey off his back regarding the heroin. And he followed the traditional playbook perfectly. He drastically changed his behavior, he actively avoided the people, places, and things that acted as triggers, and he regularly attended 12-step meetings.
Yeah, he essentially built a fortress around his abstinence. He managed his environment meticulously so that the opportunity and really the temptation to use heroin were totally neutralized.
But wait, I need to push back on this traditional narrative for a second, because I am struggling to square something here.
Okay, what is
Michael explicitly calls this period his fatal flaw because he claims he didn't lift a single finger to work on the root source of his pain. But, I mean, going to meetings, cutting out toxic social circles, constantly monitoring triggers, isn't that literally the definition of doing the work? How can he possibly say he did nothing?
Okay, so it comes down to the fundamental difference between environmental management and emotional healing.
Okay.
Changing your physical location, swapping out your friends, and reciting steps in a meeting, those are all behavioral modifications. They are external defenses. He was basically reorganizing the furniture on the deck of the ship, but as he points out, he never actually went down into the engine room.
Oh, I see.
He didn't investigate the childhood trauma. He didn't dismantle the self-loathing at all. He naively believed that just because the obsessive craving for narcotics eventually faded, the internal disease was somehow miraculously cured.
And because he thought the job was done, he gave himself permission to test the waters with a completely different substance.
Right.
He basically convinced himself that heroin was his quote-unquote real problem, the core antagonist of his life, which meant he could safely become a social drinker.
The brain is just incredibly adept at rationalizing a new coping mechanism when the old one is suddenly walled off.
It really is. And surprise, surprise, social drinking escalated into dangerous daily binge drinking very, very quickly. He basically traded the needle for the bottle.
Yeah, and there is this hauntingly precise metaphor Michael uses for this exact phase in the source text. He writes, "I switched seats on the Titanic."
Wow. That just cuts right to the bone.
Doesn't it?
You get up from the heroin chair, you walk across the tilted deck, you just sit down in the alcohol chair.
And the sociological dynamics making that transition possible are fascinating. I mean, think about it. He swapped a heavily stigmatized, criminalized street drug for a socially celebrated, easily accessible liquid.
That's such a good point.
Society looks at an IV drug user and instantly diagnoses a severe pathology. But society looks at someone putting away massive amounts of alcohol at a bar and often just dismisses it as, blowing off steam, or even celebrates it as having a robust social life.
So the external optics completely changed, which meant the social judgment changed. But internally, the mechanism was identical. He was still anesthetizing the exact same trauma.
Precisely. The trajectory of the ship never altered. It was still going down. He just moved to a more socially approved seat for the descent.
Man.
Yeah.
And this is where Michael's story takes its darkest, but honestly, arguably its most illuminating turn. Eventually, he recognizes the alcohol is actively destroying him too, so he quits drinking.
Right.
He achieves what the traditional model considers the absolute, holy grail, total, uncompromised abstinence. No heroin, no alcohol, no obvious chemical buffers whatsoever.
And this is the exact moment the cultural narrative promises peace. This is supposed to be the happy ending.
Yeah, he literally says he expected a magical world of, happy dancing unicorns, to prance into his life, showering him with serenity simply as a reward for being sober.
But that is not what happened.
Not at all. Instead, he spent nearly a decade dragging himself through crushing depression, severe anxiety, and this amplified sense of self-loathing.
He arrived at a really brutal realization, which is that abstinence does not equal recovery.
It really doesn't. And after nearly 10 years of clean living, doing everything society asked of him, his misery actually peaked. It got so profound, so entirely suffocating, that he quietly and methodically began planning his own suicide.
Which makes sense psychologically because the external distractions were completely gone, the chemical buffers were gone, which meant the internal demons were louder and more unavoidable than they had ever been in his entire life.
Right. And here is where the psychology gets really fascinating. And I want you, the listener, to pay really close attention to this paradox. Michael is a former IV drug user. If you are exhausted, in agonizing psychological pain and looking for an exit strategy, an intentional overdose is the most logical, familiar, and accessible method available.
It would absolutely be the path of least resistance,
Okay.
a return to the ultimate anesthesia.
Exactly. But Michael notes that using drugs to end his life was entirely out of the question. Like, it never even entered his mind as a viable option.
Really?
Yeah. He had no desire for a last hurrah with heroin. His sheer ironclad will to maintain his clean time was so incredibly strong that it superseded the basic logic of his own suicide plan.
That is
He
why.
wasn't craving a high, he just wanted out of the pain.
And that paradox proves the entire thesis of his essay right there. It undeniably separates the symptom from the disease. The addiction, the actual drug use, was always just a symptom. By utilizing this monumental willpower, he eradicated the symptom. But because the underlying disease, the childhood trauma, the feeling of total inadequacy was left entirely untreated, the psychological toll of maintaining that clean time nearly killed him.
He actually compares his approach during this decade to stuffing the terrifying demons of his past into an overly crowded closet. He says you can lean your back against that closet door, plant your feet, and just keep it shut through sheer force of will.
But the energy required to do that.
Exactly. The energy required to constantly hold that door shut just drains every single ounce of joy and vitality from your life.
You are technically alive that you are not living. Your entire existence is reduced to a defensive posture, constantly managing the pressure of your untreated trauma so it doesn't spill out. The hinges are groaning, the wood is splintering, and honestly, the anxiety of just waiting for the door to break is a torture all its own.
So he was standing at the brink, leaning against a breaking door, fully prepared to end his life, but he didn't. In the wee hours of the morning, something finally broke through the noise. Michael heard a voice.
A literal voice.
Yeah. Now, the text is careful to note he is not a traditionally religious person at all,
Yeah.
but he unequivocally attributes this to a higher power. This voice gave him a highly specific, highly unconventional directive. It told him to travel to the Peruvian jungle for his salvation.
Wow. I mean, that is a radical departure from the rigid, localized structure of behavioral checklists and weekly meetings we were talking about earlier. It is a terrifying leap into the absolute unknown.
It's the ultimate disruption of his carefully managed environment. And according to his essay, taking that leap completely saved his life. He followed the voice, went to the jungle, and today he is living a profoundly blessed, peaceful life in Barcelona, Spain.
That is amazing.
But let's dig into the mechanics of why a leap like that actually works. To me, going to the Peruvian jungle represents the exact moment he finally stopped leaning against the closet door. He stepped away, let the door swing wide open, and chose to walk inside to face whatever was waiting in the dark.
Sarah made a really good point earlier about environmental management. And stepping into the jungle is the perfect metaphor for stripping away every single modern environmental buffer you rely on. When you remove yourself from the familiar routines, the distractions of your city, and the defensive walls you've built up, you force a confrontation with the subconscious.
You have nowhere to hide.
Exactly. This is the messy, terrifying work of true recovery. It isn't about reciting steps in a church basement. It's about actively investigating the genesis of the pain. Like, why did the self-loathing start? What specific memories are causing the nervous system to remain in a state of high alert?
It requires dissecting the trauma instead of just running from it. It's looking at the broken architecture of your own mind and figuring out how the foundation cracked in the first place.
Precisely. In therapeutic terms, you have to safely re-expose yourself to the intolerable emotions you spent decades anesthetizing. But this time, you process them without the chemical buffer.
Which has to be excruciating.
Oh, it is excruciating nonlinear work. You are basically teaching the brain that the memory of the trauma is not the same as the trauma itself happening right now. That is how you re-regulate a shattered nervous system. Counting days of abstinence is a simple binary metric. Digging through the wreckage of childhood trauma is abstract and exhausting, but as Michael argues, it is the mandatory toll you have to pay for a genuinely liberated life.
Because abstinence without this specific recovery work just leaves you standing in the hurricane.
Exactly.
So, synthesizing everything we've pulled from Michael Cline's journey today, what is the ultimate blueprint for someone navigating this space?
I think the core takeaway is that eliminating a destructive habit, whether it's heroin, alcohol, or literally any other compulsion you use to numb out, is an incredibly brave, necessary first step.
Absolutely brave, but it is only the first step. We have to fundamentally shift our cultural paradigm to recognize that stopping the behavior just clears the smoke. It doesn't put out the fire, right? You have to patch the hull of the sinking boat. You cannot just bail water forever. And for anyone looking to understand the mechanics of this process further, the source material points directly to Michael's extended writings.
Which are definitely worth checking out.
Definitely. He published a book called New York City Junkie Days, which serves as a brutal, unfiltered examination of the descent into addiction. It shows how an ordinary person constructs that chemical armor in the first place.
And understanding the descent is just critical context for understanding the sheer force required to climb back out.
Yeah. And the companion to that is his other book, New York Recovery Days. This is where he maps out the exact territory we've been discussing today. The perilous gap between mere abstinence and the long-term structural healing of childhood trauma. It is essentially the manual for doing the messy, emotional work.
You can purchase them through our website's bookshelf, actually, at vitalvoyageblog.com.
Yes, definitely head over to vitalvoyageblog.com for that. The essay also notes that Michael keeps an open line of communication for readers navigating this transition. His direct email is provided in the text as michaelcline2323@gmail.com.
The willingness to remain accessible to people who are currently standing in that hurricane, I think that speaks volumes about the depth of his own healing.
It really does. So we have unpacked the performative illusion of the victory lap, the psychological trap of switching seats on the Titanic, the devastating paradox of pure abstinence, and the absolute necessity of opening the closet door to face the monsters inside. But before we close the book on this deep dive, there is a final lingering thought from all this that we need to address.
The implications of this architecture extend far beyond severe substance abuse. It really challenges how all of us process our coping mechanisms.
It does. Think about it. We are a society that is incredibly quick to throw a party when someone stops doing a bad thing. We shower them with praise for losing the weight, dropping the bottle, or quitting the bad habit. But how often do we actually create the space, the grace, and the sustained support required for the invisible, agonizing work of figuring out why they needed that habit to survive in the first place?
That is the real question.
Are you just bailing water, or are you finally ready to patch the hole? Thank you for joining us on the Vital Voyage Spotlight. I've been Mark Brown.
And I'm Sarah McIntyre.
Take care, everyone.